and welcome to Man's Model Moments. Today I'm going to be looking at the ICM set In the Skies of China in 1/72 scale. Which is actually 3 aircraft in one box, 2 Nate fighters and 1 Sally bomber, which is pretty unusual. Underneath ICM's usual glossy outer box cover with the artwork, we find the usual heavy-duty flip-top opening box. Opening this reveals the substantial instruction book, which we'll come to shortly. Under this is the first bag of plastic, which covers the Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally, or Type 97 Heavy Bomber, which was tooled in 2022. We then have 2 identical bag sprues, each covering one of the Nakajima Ki-27 Nate fighters, these being slightly older toolings dating back to 2006. Left in the bottom of the box is the ubiquitous ICM paint chart, no need to cover that here. Let's cover the Ki-27 instructions first, as they're much smaller and also older, and this is reflected in them being a single folded sheet, printed mainly in black and white, and although there is a sprue frame layout, there isn't the familiar ICM colour key present. Opening this up, you can see there are only a few steps, these being an exploded and shaded 3D format, a little different to what we're used to from ICM now. The instructions do cover a lot of parts for detail on things like the engine, however, which is good for an aircraft as small as the Nate. Overall, the instructions are fine, showing these assemblies coming together as you might expect, but they do feel a bit dated and aren't as clear as they could be. The back covers final assembly, and this is where we find the paint guide, but without any colour as we're used to these days. The colour scheme and decal guide is a separate single folded sheet with the 4 schemes marked out in black and white. By itself, this is perfectly acceptable, but it isn't what we're used to from a present day ICM kit, as we'll see shortly. In stark contrast to these, the Sally instructions are immediately recognisable as ICM's newest format with glossy colour outer with art, history and colour callouts on the front page. They open to frame layouts which include colour shading to indicate unused parts, again as we're now used to seeing. Opening the booklet up, the very clear isometric CAD drawing style of newer ICM instructions shows how the company has developed in the 16 years between these 2 kits being originally tooled. The build is broken down into logical steps, with sub-assemblies called out where needed, and I find it difficult to make mistakes with modern ICM instructions. They're very similar to the best we see out there from Airfix and the like. We can also see some assemblies here which show a lot of detail being put into a 1/72 scale kit, which we'll see again when we get to the plastic. As an example of that, here we can see the engines covered in some detail. Gone are the days of a single flat piece with some vague radial engine blobs moulded onto them being put in the cowling. It's at the end of the instructions, however, where we see something that I'd love other manufacturers to adopt: a full set of masking templates and guide for the glazing. Honestly, with the amount of windows in this aircraft, I think I'd recommend a masking set, but if you're on a budget, then this helps enormously, and it's great practice. Thank you, ICM. We also get the first of the 4 schemes for this aircraft in lovely 4-view full colour, and it's such a difference from the black and white ones supplied for the Nate. The schemes cover quite a range of camouflage patterns too, something not always true of Japanese aircraft in World War II, but being an early war aircraft in the Chinese offensive, you get full 3-colour camo, solid colour and mottled, which is nice to see. The decals supplied for the Sally are very nice. Bright, solid colours, nicely printed, with perfect registration and good colour density. It remains to see how they look over a painted surface, but the red does look good on the sheet, with no hint of translucence. You might expect the decal sheet for the Ki-27 to be less interesting or not as refined, but nothing could be further from the truth. These are just as good as those for the bomber, and feature a wealth of bright splashes of colour for the various different schemes. So this is all the plastic for one of the nates. As it was a 1930s design, it's not a terribly large aircraft. Still, there are a fair number of parts here, including some very small and fine pieces for things like the engine, cockpit, and so on. Transparencies are separately bagged, and overall this is not a bad looking set of sprues. Moving to the main fuselage of the Sally, we can see these are supplied individually on their own sprue, and are nicely cast with a complex curve of the wing root and delicately recessed detail on the body of the fuselage itself. The next sprue features one of the wings and the bomber interior floor, which itself has nice detail moulded on it too. You can see more of these delicately recessed panel lines on the wings and separate tail. And there is also fine casting on some of the detail parts, as shown here. This separate sprue covering the tail replaces that on the prior sprue for this version, with its much more sharply pointed rear. The horizontal stabilizers and control surfaces are also replaced. The port wing sprue also includes elements for blanking the interior of the wings in the fuselage, undercarriage fairings, and other detail pieces. The last main sprue frames are two identical ones covering the engines, undercarriage, and defensive armament. You get a plethora of machine guns here, as well as lots of detail pieces that should make the landing gear and engines very nice. The last sprue here is of course the transparent one, and this is very extensive in the Sally, including this enormous greenhouse structure on the top of the aircraft. The plastic here is very nicely formed, including some complex curves like that for the nosepiece, and yet it is commendably clear, something I've noticed in other ICM kits as well. So let's take a closer look at the items supplied in the kit then. Starting with the fuselage interior, you can see we have basic detail moulded in for the ribbing, with various attachment points for the small details that will be added. There are some shallow ejector pin marks, but these have mainly been designed to be in unseen areas, like in the wing roots, which will be covered by blanking pieces. Towards the rear of the aircraft you can see more locating pins for the detail, as well as things like the door outline recessed into the fuselage should you wish to cut it out and pose it open, for example. The starboard wing sprue shows both these delicate panel lines I mentioned before, but also the fine casting in small details like on these compressed gas bottles. This can also be seen in elements like the main cockpit floor and pilot's position, and this continues down the length of this piece. You also get nice fabric effects on the control surfaces, as we can see here. Moving on, you can see more of that very fine detail together with large pieces on the same frame here with the port wing sprue. Here are those internal blanking pieces for the fuselage wing roots. The main instrument panel and sidewall here both have very fine detail which should respond nicely to painting. Here's more of that panel lining on the wings. More internal detail in these bulkheads. This nicely cast tail wheel, and the very fine loop antenna. Here's that replacement frame for the rear aircraft pieces, unsurprisingly displaying the same level of detail as the main items. How fine this detail gets is shown in the engine sprues, with a lot of very fine pieces that are going to need careful removal from the main frame. The level of casting detail here though is very impressive, from the smooth finish on the wheels to the cooling ribbing on the engine cylinders, and all of this in 1/72nd scale. This is perhaps most aptly demonstrated in the machine guns, which are lovely and a far cry from the simple clumsy sticks we used to get in the 1970s. The landing gear too are well produced, looking more like a 1/48th offering than a 1/72nd one. As I mentioned before, the clear sprue is very nice, with split points along framing so any work on them won't mar the clear areas. And one feature I really like on these is that the framing is translucent, making it easier to distinguish should you want to mask these up yourself. It's a small thing, but one that really helps in practical use of these, and again, I wish more manufacturers did this. Now onto the nates. Once again, these are nicely detailed little kits, and you do get detail on things like the small instrument panel. There's also fantastic depth to what is provided, like the engine exhaust collector ring here. Some parts are more basic, like the machine guns in the cowling, and the mouldings don't feel as crisp as those in the Sally, which again isn't too surprising. The interior doesn't have much detail, and the pin ejector marks are more pronounced, but these won't be seen anyway. Moving to the wing sprue, you can again see some very small details here. Looking at the actual surface of the wings, and you can see very delicate detail. I would probably say too delicate even, and I'm not sure what of this will actually be visible once the model is built and painted. In fact, it almost feels like the designers were designing ahead of the ability of the tooling to be able to really recreate what they envisaged. We'll have to see in the end what it builds up like. So overall, this is a really interesting set. Considering this is about £45 in the UK for 3 models, if you said that that was £7.50 for each fighter and £30 for the bomber, that's really good value. You get a lot of plastic for that too, and the decals and schemes provided in the box give a good range of finishes for variety. The Sally bomber is beautiful, and everything we've come to expect from modern ICM toolings. The detail is extensive, finesse is great, and it looks like it'll build to a very interesting counter to an HE-111 or Wellington, for example. The nates do have a surprising amount of detail for such a small fighter, and some of it is undoubtedly going to be a bit fiddly. The casting of these is generally good, but compared to the Sally they are noticeably older, and it really demonstrates the improvements ICM have made in a very short amount of time. What elevates them really are the decals provided for the schemes, which were a bit different from the later World War II period, and are very much more reminiscent of that golden age of aviation, loud and proud. In the end then, this is a great buy. You're getting a lot of modelling time for your money, some great detail, and slightly unusual subjects from a period of time that isn't really that well covered. It's certainly not a set for a beginner, with the wealth of small and fiddly parts in this smaller scale, plus that huge amount of glazing to mask, even with the provided templates. That aside, if you've a fair few kits under your belt, and this is your scale, it's an interesting addition to your lineup, and certainly a break from another Spitfire or 109. Anyway, that's my take. What did you think of the set? Please do let me know in the comments below. Make sure you're subscribed with the notification bell set to all so you don't miss the next review, which will be the big brother to this set, the Ki-21 Sally again, but this time in 1/48 scale. That's all for this instalment of Man's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.